Welcome to Mysteries After Midnight. Tonight, we journey to the fog-shrouded moors of Yorkshire, where Thornfield Manor stands like a monument to secrets best left buried. The autumn of 1935 brings more than falling leaves to this isolated estate. It brings death, deception, and the peculiar genius of one Hercule Poirot. Our Belgian detective and his faithful companion, Captain Hastings, arrive not by chance, but by urgent summons from a woman who fears for her life. 3 widows, 1 will, and a fortune that tempts even the most loyal heart to murder. Join us for the testament of 3 widows, a tale of greed, betrayal, and the price of keeping silent, crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this mystery unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The summons to Thornfield Manor. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning, interrupting what had been, until that moment, a pleasantly idle October day. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, had been enjoying my morning paper while Poirot meticulously arranged his correspondence by size, a ritual I had long ceased to question. "Mes amis," Poirot murmured, holding the yellow paper between his fingertips as though it might contaminate his pristine desk. "We are summoned to Yorkshire." I set down my teacup with interest. Yorkshire, rather dreary this time of year, isn't it? The weather, perhaps, but not the circumstances. He smoothed his magnificent mustaches, a gesture that invariably preceded some pronouncement. "Lady Constance Waverly writes with urgency. She fears, Hastings, that someone intends to murder her." "Good Lord, has she gone to the police?" "Mais non. She writes, the police would think me mad. Only you, Monsieur Poirot, with your understanding of the human heart, will comprehend the danger I face." Most intriguing, is it not? Within hours, we found ourselves aboard the afternoon train to York, watching the London suburbs give way to countryside painted in shades of rust and gold. Poirot sat opposite me, his eyes closed, though I knew his little grey cells were already at work. "Tell me, Hastings," he said suddenly, "what do you know of the Waverly family?" "Not much, I'm afraid. Old Yorkshire family, weren't they? Something about wool mills." "Précisément. Sir Bartholomew Waverly made his fortune in textiles before the war. He died 2 years ago, leaving a considerable estate to his wife, Lady Constance. But here is what interests Hercule Poirot. Lady Constance is not the only widow residing at Thornfield Manor." I leaned forward. "No? There are 3 widows in that house, mon ami. Lady Constance, naturally, but also Mrs. Margaret Holbrook, Sir Bartholomew's sister, widowed these 15 years, and Mrs. Eleanor Crane, a cousin by marriage, widowed only last spring." He opened his eyes, and they gleamed with interest. 3 widows, Hastings, all dependent upon the Waverly fortune, and now one of them fears for her life. The motor car that collected us from York Station was driven by a taciturn chauffeur who navigated the narrow country roads with practiced ease. As we climbed into the Yorkshire moors, the afternoon light faded to a pewter grey, and wisps of fog began to curl across the heather. Thornfield Manor materialized from the mist like something from a Gothic novel. A sprawling edifice of weathered stone, its windows glowing amber against the gathering dusk. Ivy claimed half the western wing, and somewhere in the distance I heard the mournful cry of a curlew. "Cheerful place," I muttered. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said quietly. "The curtains in the upper windows. They twitch. We are being watched." The door opened before we could knock, revealing a butler of advanced years whose face might have been carved from the same stone as the manor. "Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings," he intoned. "Lady Constance awaits you in the drawing-room." We followed him through a hall hung with portraits of stern-faced Waverleys, their painted eyes seeming to track our progress. The drawing room, when we reached it, was a study in faded grandeur. Persian carpets worn thin in places, furniture that whispered of better days, and a fire that did little to dispel the chill. 3 women awaited us, arranged like figures in a tableau. Lady Constance Waverly rose first, a woman of perhaps 55, still handsome despite the lines of worry etched around her eyes. She wore mourning colors, though her husband had been dead 2 years, and her hands trembled slightly as she extended them to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, how good of you to come so quickly." "Madame, when a lady fears for her life, Hercule Poirot does not delay." He bowed over her hand, then turned his attention to the others. Mrs. Margaret Holbrook sat ramrod straight in a wing-back chair, a woman who had perhaps never been beautiful, but possessed a certain stark dignity. Her steel-grey hair was severely arranged, and she regarded us with cool assessment. The third widow, Mrs. Eleanor Crane, was altogether different, a nervous, fluttering creature of perhaps 40, with pale blue eyes that darted between us like a trapped bird seeking escape. She clutched a handkerchief, twisting it between her fingers. "Perhaps," Lady Constance said, "we should discuss matters privately first." "No." Mrs. Holbrook's voice cut through the room like a blade. "If you've brought this foreign detective here to investigate your fantasies, Constance, we have a right to hear what nonsense you've been spreading." Lady Constance's face flushed. "They are not fantasies, Margaret. The attempts on my life have been quite real." "Attempts?" I exclaimed. "Plural?" "3 times in the past fortnight," Lady Constance said. "First, the banister on the main staircase. It gave way when I leaned upon it. Only catching myself on the wall prevented a fatal fall." "Dry rot," Mrs. Holbrook said dismissively. "This house is falling apart." "Then the conservatory door. It locked behind me on the coldest night we've had. If Thompson hadn't heard me calling—" "You probably turned the key yourself by accident," Mrs. Holbrook countered. "You've been distracted lately." Lady Constance's jaw tightened. "And the medicine?" This silenced Mrs. Holbrook. Mrs. Crane's handkerchief twisting intensified. "What medicine?" Poirot asked gently. "My heart medication. Dr. Pemberton prescribed it 6 months ago. Last week I noticed the tablets looked different, slightly smaller, a different shade. When I had them analyzed—" She paused, her voice dropping. "They were sugar pills. Someone had replaced my medication with placebos." "Très intéressant," Poirot murmured. "And who has access to your medicine?" "Anyone in the house. I keep it in my bedroom, but we don't lock doors here. We never have." "Perhaps we should start," Mrs. Crane whispered, her first contribution to the conversation. A clock chimed the hour, and as if summoned, the butler appeared. "Dinner is served, my lady." Lady Constance rose. "You'll dine with us, of course. Thompson has prepared your rooms in the east wing." As we filed toward the dining room, Poirot paused beside a portrait, a stern-faced man with penetrating dark eyes. "Sir Bartholomew?" he inquired. "Yes," Lady Constance said softly. "Painted just months before his death." "A strong face," Poirot observed. "Tell me, madame. His will, it was straightforward." She hesitated. "There were provisions, conditions." "What sort of conditions?" I asked. But before she could answer, a crash echoed from the dining room, followed by a strangled cry. We rushed forward to find Thompson standing over a shattered serving dish, his face pale as parchment. On the floor, among the scattered porcelain and what appeared to be roast pheasant, lay a single black feather. "Mon Dieu," breathed Mrs. Crane, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. "The death omen, just like before Charles died." Mrs. Holbrook's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Nonsense! It's from the pheasant, nothing more." But I noticed that even she had paled, and Lady Constance gripped the door frame as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Poirot bent down, picking up the feather with his handkerchief. He examined it closely, his face revealing nothing. "Most curious," he said finally. "This is not from a pheasant, mes amis. This is from a raven, and it has been placed here quite deliberately." "Who would do such a thing?" Lady Constance whispered. Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Someone, madame, who wishes to send a message. The question is, to whom? And why now at this precise moment?" He looked around the room, his gaze resting on each face in turn. Thompson had regained some color but kept his eyes downcast. Mrs. Holbrook's jaw was set in defiance. Mrs. Crane seemed ready to faint. And Lady Constance. Lady Constance stared at the feather as though it were a serpent coiled to strike. "Come," Poirot said briskly. "We shall dine, and you shall tell Hercule Poirot everything about Sir Bartholomew's will, for I suspect that is where our answer lies, in the testament that binds 3 widows to this house of shadows." Chapter 2. 3 widows and a will. Dinner proved to be an exercise in studied tension. The raven feather had been removed, the broken porcelain swept away, yet its presence lingered like smoke in the air. Thompson served each course with hands that barely trembled, while the 3 widows picked at their food with varying degrees of pretense. Poirot, I noticed, ate with his usual precision while observing everything. His eyes, bright and shrewd, missed nothing. Not Mrs. Crane's nervous glances toward the darkened windows, nor Mrs. Holbrook's white-knuckled grip on her soup spoon, nor the way Lady Constance started at every small sound. "Tell me," Poirot said, delicately setting down his fish fork, "about Sir Bartholomew's will. You mentioned provisions, Lady Constance." Our hostess dabbed her lips with her napkin, a delay that fooled no one. "It's rather complicated, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps we should wait." "No." Mrs. Holbrook's interruption was sharp. "If you've brought him here, he should know everything, including how Bartholomew tried to control us from beyond the grave. Margaret, please." "The will," Mrs. Holbrook continued, ignoring her sister-in-law, "requires all 3 of us to remain in residence at Thornfield Manor for 5 years following Bartholomew's death. If any of us leaves for more than a fortnight, we forfeit our portion of the inheritance." "Très intéressant," Poirot murmured. "And these portions, they are equal?" "Hardly," Mrs. Holbrook said with bitter satisfaction. "Constance receives the house and 60% of the fortune. I receive 25%. Eleanor," she glanced at the younger woman with something approaching pity, "receives 15%. Mrs. Crane's pale blue eyes filled with tears. "Charles always said Cousin Bartholomew would remember us. We had such debts when Charles died. The creditors were quite merciless." "And if one of you should die before the 5 years conclude?" Poirot asked gently. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Finally, Lady Constance spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The deceased's portion is divided equally among the survivors." "Ah." Poirot touched his napkin to his mustaches. "So if you were to die, madame, Mrs. Holbrook and Mrs. Crane would each inherit 30% of your share, giving Mrs. Holbrook 55% control of the estate and Mrs. Crane 45%. "Precisely why these accusations are absurd," Mrs. Holbrook said. "If anyone should fear for their life, it's Eleanor. She has the smallest portion. Killing her would benefit Constance or myself very little." Mrs. Crane's handkerchief fluttered to her lap. "Margaret, how can you speak of killing so casually?" "Because someone must speak sensibly. Constance has worked herself into hysteria over a few household accidents. They were not accidents." A new voice spoke from the doorway. We all turned to see a young woman enter, perhaps 25, with striking auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. She wore a simple grey dress that marked her as neither family nor servant. "Ah, Miss Fairfax," Lady Constance said with visible relief. "Gentlemen, may I present Miss Julia Fairfax, my late husband's secretary? She's been invaluable in managing the estate papers. Julia, this is Monsieur Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings." Miss Fairfax inclined her head gracefully. "I apologize for interrupting, but I couldn't help overhearing." Lady Constance is not imagining things. I've seen evidence of tampering myself." "What sort of evidence?" I asked. She moved to the sideboard, her movements precise and economical. The banister, for instance. The wood showed signs of sawing, deliberate weakening at the stress point. I photographed it before the repairs were made. She withdrew a small photograph from her pocket and handed it to Poirot. He studied it with interest. "Most thorough of you, mademoiselle. Tell me, what is your role here exactly?" "I manage Sir Bartholomew's remaining business interests and maintain the household accounts. He hired me 2 years before his death, when his previous secretary retired." "Rather unusual," Mrs. Holbrook observed coldly, "for a young woman to be retained in such a position." Miss Fairfax's chin lifted slightly. "Sir Bartholomew valued competence over convention, Mrs. Holbrook." "Indeed he did," Lady Constance said warmly. "Julia has been a godsend. I don't know how we would have managed without her." Thompson entered to clear the fish course, and I noticed how his eyes lingered on Miss Fairfax with something that might have been concern or warning. "Tell me about the night Sir Bartholomew died," Poirot said suddenly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "It was a heart attack," Lady Constance said. "Dr. Pemberton was quite clear, but there were circumstances, were there not?" Poirot's voice was gentle but insistent. "The argument?" Mrs. Crane gasped softly. Mrs. Holbrook's face darkened. "How did you know about that?" Lady Constance asked. "I make it my business to know, madame, but I would prefer to hear the truth from you." Lady Constance looked at her companions, then sighed. "Very well. That night, it was 2 years ago this November, Bartholomew announced he was changing his will. He'd received a letter that afternoon, though he wouldn't say from whom. He was furious, pacing the library like a caged animal. "What did the letter say?" I asked. "We never found it," Miss Fairfax said quietly. "I searched his desk thoroughly afterward. It had vanished." "Continue, madame," Poirot urged. "We were all here for dinner, Margaret, Eleanor, myself, and Julia. Also Dr. Pemberton, who often dined with us, and Mr. Whitfield, Bartholomew's solicitor. After dinner, Bartholomew asked Whitfield to stay, said he needed to make immediate changes to his will. He was particularly agitated about what he called provisions for justice." "Justice?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. A curious phrase. "That's what we thought," Mrs. Holbrook said. "When Whitfield protested that such changes should be carefully considered, Bartholomew flew into a rage. He accused someone in the room of deception, though he wouldn't say whom or about what. And then, Lady Constance said softly, he clutched his chest and collapsed. Dr. Pemberton tried everything, but it was too late. His heart had given out." "Most convenient," Poirot observed, "that the doctor was present." "Pemberton is above suspicion," Mrs. Holbrook said sharply. "He's been the family physician for 30 years. Yet Sir Bartholomew died before he could change his will," Poirot mused, "and the mysterious letter disappeared. Tell me, who benefits most from the current will remaining unchanged?" The 3 widows exchanged glances. "All of us," Lady Constance admitted. Bartholomew hinted that the new will would include substantial charitable donations. We would all have received less. "But some would have lost more than others," Miss Fairfax said quietly. When we all looked at her, she continued, "I handle the accounts, remember. I know who among you has debts, who has been living beyond their means, who desperately needs their inheritance." "That's quite enough, Miss Fairfax," Mrs. Holbrook said icily. But Poirot leaned forward with interest. Non, continue, mademoiselle. The truth, she must be spoken." Miss Fairfax hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "Mrs. Crane's late husband left enormous gambling debts. Without her inheritance, she faces bankruptcy. Mrs. Holbrook has been supporting her own son's failing business ventures. She's already spent most of her personal savings. And Lady Constance." She paused, looking uncomfortable. Go on, Lady Constance said tiredly. Lady Constance has been paying substantial sums to someone in London, monthly payments that began 6 months before Sir Bartholomew's death. Blackmail, I exclaimed. Medical treatments, Lady Constance said firmly, for a cousin's child. Bartholomew didn't approve of charity to anyone he considered undeserving. Poirot's moustaches twitched, a sure sign his little grey cells were working. So we have 3 widows, all desperate for money, trapped together in this house by the terms of a will that Sir Bartholomew attempted to change on the very night he died. Most suggestive. Suggestive of what? Mrs. Crane asked nervously. Of the fact, madame, that Sir Bartholomew's death was perhaps not as natural as it appeared. Are you suggesting murder? Mrs. Holbrook demanded. Dr. Pemberton confirmed it was his heart. Hearts can be encouraged to fail, Poirot said mildly. Digitalis, for instance, in the wrong dose, can mimic a heart attack perfectly. Tell me, was Sir Bartholomew taking any medications? Only his dyspepsia powders, Lady Constance said. He took them religiously after dinner. And that night? Yes, I saw him take them myself. Thompson brought them on the silver tray, as always. We all turned to look at the butler, who had just entered with the meat course. His face remained impassive. The powders were tested, Monsieur Poirot, he said calmly. Dr. Pemberton insisted, given the sudden nature of Sir Bartholomew's death. They contained nothing but the usual bismuth and magnesia. Yet the little grey cells, they whisper to me that all is not as it seems, Poirot said. This letter that vanished, this talk of justice, this convenient heart attack just as the will is to be changed. A scream shattered the night. We all leaped to our feet. The scream came again, high, terrified, from somewhere above us. That's Millie, Mrs. Crane gasped. Lady Constance's maid. We rushed from the dining room, Poirot moving with surprising speed for a man who usually disdained physical exertion. Up the main staircase we ran, following the sound of continued sobbing to Lady Constance's bedroom. Millie stood in the doorway, her face white as chalk, pointing with a trembling finger into the room. On Lady Constance's pillow lay another black raven feather, but that wasn't what had caused the maid's terror. Beside the feather lay a photograph, old and yellowed with age. It showed a young woman in Victorian dress, her face beautiful but melancholy. And across the photograph, in what appeared to be fresh blood, someone had written a single word. Justice. Lady Constance swayed on her feet. Dear God, she whispered. It's her. It's Lydia. Who is Lydia? Poirot asked sharply. But Lady Constance had fainted dead away. Chapter 3. Death before dinner. Lady Constance recovered consciousness slowly, her eyelids fluttering like moth wings. Dr. Pemberton, who had been summoned immediately, administered smelling salts while we gathered in her sitting room, a more intimate space adjoining the bedroom where the photograph had been found. There now, Lady Constance, the doctor said soothingly. He was a man of perhaps 60, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, and the gentle manner of one who had attended deathbeds and birthbeds alike. You've had a shock. Lydia, she whispered, trying to sit up. The photograph is safe, Poirot assured her, producing the item wrapped in his handkerchief. But you must tell us, madame, who is this Lydia? Lady Constance's hands trembled as she accepted the tea Mrs. Crane had poured. She was Bartholomew's first wife. The room fell silent. Even Mrs. Holbrook appeared stunned. First wife? I exclaimed. But I thought. Everyone thinks I was his only wife, Lady Constance said bitterly. Bartholomew made certain of that. Lydia died 30 years ago when he was just starting to build his fortune. He rarely spoke of her, and when he did, she shuddered. How did she die? Poirot asked gently. Suicide. The word hung in the air like a curse. She threw herself from the east tower of this very house. Bartholomew found her body in the morning on the stones below. Mrs. Crane's handkerchief was pressed to her mouth. How horrible! But why would she? No one knows, Lady Constance said. There was no note, no explanation. Bartholomew was devastated. He sealed the East Tower and forbade anyone from speaking her name. Yet someone has not forgotten, Poirot observed, studying the photograph. This blood, it is still wet, fresh. Someone was in your room within the past hour, madame. But that's impossible, Miss Fairfax protested. We were all at dinner. Not all, Poirot corrected. Thompson left several times to fetch courses. The maid, Millie, was she not preparing the bedrooms? And Dr. Pemberton, you arrived after dinner had begun, did you not? The doctor nodded. I had a patient in the village who delayed me. I arrived just as the fish was being served. Time enough to place a photograph, Mrs. Holbrook observed coldly. Really, Pemberton, where were you? Margaret, Lady Constance protested. Dr. Pemberton would never... Would never what? The doctor asked mildly. I'm afraid Mrs. Holbrook is right to question everyone. After all, someone in this house is playing a very dangerous game. Poirot turned the photograph over carefully. On the back, in faded ink, was written, Lydia Waverly, 1905. 6 months before... The rest was torn away. 6 months before her death, Lady Constance finished quietly. This was taken in the spring. She died in November. The same month Sir Bartholomew died, I realized. Précisément, Hastings. The coincidence, she is suggestive, no? There's something else, Miss Fairfax said hesitantly. About Lydia's death, I found some old papers in Sir Bartholomew's study, correspondence from that time. There were rumors. What kind of rumors? Poirot asked sharply. That she didn't jump. That she was pushed. Lady Constance gasped. That's impossible. Bartholomew was devoted to her. Yet he remarried rather quickly, did he not? Mrs. Holbrook interrupted. You became the second Mrs. Waverly barely 2 years after Lydia's death. Lady Constance flushed. Bartholomew was lonely. He needed... A knock at the door interrupted her. Thompson entered, his usually impassive face showing signs of strain. I beg your pardon, my lady, but there's been an incident in the wine cellar. What sort of incident? Poirot demanded. Perhaps you should see for yourself, sir. We followed Thompson through the house and down a narrow stone staircase that descended into darkness. The wine cellar was vast, with arched ceilings and row upon row of dusty bottles. But it was the far wall that drew our attention. Written in what appeared to be red wine dripping down the ancient stones were the words, 3 widows for 3 sins. 1 has paid. 2 remain. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. He approached the wall, careful not to disturb the puddle of wine at its base. This was written recently. See how it still drips? Within the last quarter hour. But we were all upstairs, Dr. Pemberton protested. Someone is lying, Mrs. Holbrook said flatly. Someone left that gathering and came down here. Poirot knelt beside the puddle, examining it closely. Curious, he murmured. The wine, it has an unusual scent. Thompson, what wines do you keep in this section? The vintage clarets, sir. Sir Bartholomew's private collection. And who has access? Everyone in the household, sir. The cellar is never locked. Poirot dipped his finger in the puddle and raised it to his nose, then touched it delicately to his tongue. His eyes widened. This is not wine, he announced. It is wine mixed with something else. Something bitter. Thompson, bring me a glass. When the butler returned with a crystal glass, Poirot carefully collected some of the liquid. He held it to the light, swirling it gently. Hastings, what do you observe? I peered at the glass. It's darker than normal claret. And there's a residue at the bottom. Exactement. This wine has been mixed with a dissolved substance, I suspect. He paused, his mustaches twitching. But no, we must be certain. Dr. Pemberton, might you test this in your laboratory? Of course. But what do you suspect? Something that should not be in wine, Doctor. Something that perhaps was once in Sir Bartholomew's dyspepsia powders. The silence was deafening. You're suggesting Bartholomew was poisoned, Lady Constance whispered. I suggest nothing yet, madame. But consider, we have mysterious messages about justice, references to a woman who died 30 years ago, and now wine mixed with an unknown substance. The pattern, she begins to emerge. We returned to the sitting room, each lost in private thoughts. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. The three widows sat apart from each other, the distance between them more than physical. I think, Lady Constance said suddenly, I should tell you about the other letters. Everyone turned to stare at her. What letters? Mrs. Holbrook demanded. They began arriving a month ago, always the same message. Justice for Lydia. I burned them all. I thought it was someone playing a cruel joke. Why did you not mention this before? Poirot asked sternly. Because I knew what you would think, what everyone would think, that Bartholomew had something to do with Lydia's death. But he didn't. He couldn't have. Yet someone believes otherwise, Poirot said. Someone who has waited 30 years for revenge. Tell me, who else was in the house when Lydia died? Thompson, who had been standing silent by the door, cleared his throat. I was, sir. I was a footman then, just starting in service. Anyone else? Mrs. Jennings, the cook. But she passed 5 years ago, and old Mr. Crawford, the head gardener. He retired to Devon. So you are the only remaining witness, Poirot mused. Tell me, Thompson, what do you remember of that night? The butler's face remained carefully neutral. Very little, sir. It was my evening off. I returned to find the house in uproar and poor Mrs. Lydia gone. And Sir Bartholomew? Locked in his study, sir. He didn't emerge for 3 days. Miss Fairfax, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke. There's something else. In the papers I found, there was mention of a sister. Lydia had a younger sister who came to visit just before her death. What became of her? I asked. She disappeared after the funeral. No one knew where she went. Poirot stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the dark moors. So we have a sister who vanished, a death that may not have been suicide, and now, 30 years later, someone seeks justice. But why now? Why wait so long? Perhaps, Mrs. Crane suggested timidly, because Bartholomew is dead. Perhaps they were afraid of him while he lived. Or perhaps, Mrs. Holbrook said, this is all an elaborate hoax to frighten Constance into leaving, forfeiting her inheritance. You would like that, wouldn't you, Margaret? Lady Constance said sharply. With me gone, you'd control the estate. How dare you? A crash of breaking glass interrupted the argument. We rushed to the window to see a figure in black running across the moors, disappearing into the fog. On the terrace below, amid the shattered remains of what had been a large mirror from the hall, lay a third raven feather, and beside it, clear in the gaslight spilling from the house, was a woman's glove. A very old glove, yellowed with age. Poirot retrieved it carefully, examining the delicate lace work. Inside, embroidered in fading thread, were the initials L.W. Lydia Waverly, Lady Constance breathed. That's impossible. She's been dead for 30 years. Someone, Poirot said grimly, wishes us to believe otherwise. The question is, who? More importantly, why has this ghost chosen now to walk? As if in answer, the lights throughout Thornfield Manor suddenly went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. Chapter 4. The Peculiar Testament. In the darkness, someone screamed, Mrs. Crane, by the pitch of it. I heard the scrape of furniture, the crash of something porcelain hitting the floor, and then Dr. Pemberton's steady voice. Everyone remain calm. Thompson, surely you have candles. In the pantry, sir, if I can find my way. Un moment, Poirot's voice commanded through the darkness. Nobody move. Listen. We froze. In the silence, I could hear my own heartbeat, the wind rattling the windows, and then footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps moving above us. Someone is in the east tower, Lady Constance whispered. "But that's impossible. It's been sealed since—" Light flared as Dr. Pemberton struck a match. In its brief illumination, I saw faces frozen in fear, except for Poirot, whose eyes gleamed with interest. "The sealed tower where Lydia died," he murmured. "Most instructive. Thompson, fetch those candles immediately. Hastings, come with me. Poirot, you can't mean to go up there in the dark. The darkness she conceals, but she also reveals, mon ami. Bring your service revolver, if you please." By the time Thompson had distributed candles, Poirot and I were already climbing the narrow staircase to the east wing. The dust of decades swirled in our candlelight, and cobwebs brushed against our faces like phantom fingers. The door to the tower stood open, the door that Lady Constance swore had been sealed for 30 years. The lock had been forced recently by the look of the fresh scratches on the wood. Inside, the circular room was a monument to decay. Furniture shrouded in dust sheets stood like ghosts, and the windows were black with grime. But it was the far wall that drew our attention. Hanging there was a portrait, a woman in a wedding dress, her dark eyes seeming to follow us as we approached. It was Lydia Waverly, younger than in the photograph, radiantly beautiful, but with something melancholy in her expression. "Observe, Hastings." Poirot held his candle higher. "The dust on the floor, footprints, many of them, and recent. Someone has been coming here regularly." Beneath the portrait stood a small table, and on it, my blood ran cold, were fresh flowers. White roses, barely wilted. "Someone has been tending a shrine," I breathed. "Mais oui. For how long, I wonder?" Poirot moved to the window, the one from which Lydia had allegedly thrown herself. It was locked from the inside, rusted shut. Curious, if she jumped from her, who locked the window afterward? Perhaps Bartholomew, when he sealed the room. Perhaps, or perhaps she never jumped at all. We searched the room methodically. Behind the portrait, Poirot discovered a hidden compartment containing a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. "Love letters?" I asked. He scanned them quickly. "No, Hastings. Something far more interesting. These are legal documents. Contracts, and they are signed by Sir Bartholomew Waverly and a Mr. Jonas Holbrook." "Holbrook? But that's Margaret Holbrook's late husband. Précisément." He tucked the documents into his jacket. "Come, we must return to the others. But first—" He stopped at the doorway, examining the forced lock more carefully. "See these scratches, Hastings? They're on both sides. Someone broke in, yes, but someone also broke out." We found the others assembled in the drawing room, candles casting dancing shadows on their faces. The electricity had been restored. Thompson had found the main switch had been deliberately thrown, but everyone seemed reluctant to fully trust the light. "Well?" Mrs. Holbrook demanded. "What did you find?" "Evidence," Poirot replied calmly, "that the past is not as dead as we might wish. Mr. Whitfield, the solicitor, he is still in practice." "Yes," Lady Constance replied. "He has offices in the village." "Excellent. Tomorrow we shall pay him a visit. But tonight I think we must all be very careful. The person who seeks justice for Lydia grows bolder." "You speak as if you believe in ghosts," Mrs. Holbrook scoffed. "Oh, I believe in ghosts, madame, but the ghosts that concern Hercule Poirot are those that walk on living feet." That night, I slept fitfully. The wind howled across the moors, and twice I thought I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. When I finally dozed, I dreamed of a woman in white, falling endlessly through darkness. I woke to Poirot shaking my shoulder urgently. "Vite, Hastings! Something has happened!" I threw on my dressing gown and followed him downstairs. The household was in uproar. Lady Constance stood in the breakfast room, pale as death, while Mrs. Crane sobbed in a corner. Dr. Pemberton knelt beside a figure on the floor. It was Mrs. Holbrook. She lay perfectly still, her face an alarming shade of blue. Is she, I began. Alive, Dr. Pemberton said tersely, but barely. Poisoned, I believe. I've administered an emetic, but she needs immediate hospital attention. As Thompson went to telephone for an ambulance, Poirot examined the breakfast table. Mrs. Holbrook's place was set, her tea half drunk, her toast barely touched. Who prepared the breakfast? He asked. I did, Thompson replied, as always. But everyone serves themselves from the sideboard. And who was present when Mrs. Holbrook collapsed? I was, Miss Fairfax said, her usual composure shaken. We were discussing the household accounts when she suddenly clutched her throat and fell. Poirot lifted the teacup, sniffing delicately. Bitter almonds, he announced. Cyanide, a crude attempt. She did not receive a fatal dose. Thank God, Lady Constance whispered. Then her eyes widened. But that tea service, it's mine, my special jasmine blend. No one else drinks it. So either Mrs. Holbrook took your tea by mistake, Poirot said slowly, or the poison was meant for me. Lady Constance sank into a chair. Just as I said, someone is trying to kill me. But why would Margaret drink your tea? I asked. Miss Fairfax answered quietly. She's been having headaches. Lady Constance offered her the jasmine tea, said it was soothing. Poirot's mustaches twitched. So Lady Constance offers tea to Mrs. Holbrook, who drinks it and is poisoned. How very convenient. Surely you're not suggesting. Lady Constance began indignantly. I suggest nothing, madame. I observe only. Now, while we wait for the ambulance, let us visit Mr. Whitfield. There are questions about Sir Bartholomew's will that require urgent answers. The solicitor's office occupied a narrow building on the village high street. Mr. Whitfield himself was a thin, nervous man who seemed unsurprised by our early arrival. I've been expecting you, Monsieur Poirot, he said, ushering us into his cluttered office. Ever since I heard you were at Thornfield, I assume this is about the will? Among other things. Tell me, monsieur, what can you reveal about Sir Bartholomew's original will, the one before his current testament? Whitfield hesitated. That's confidential. 3 attempts have been made on Lady Constance's life, and this morning Mrs. Holbrook was poisoned. I think, monsieur, the time for confidentiality has passed. The solicitor paled. Poisoned? Dear God. He moved to his files, extracting a thick folder. The original will was quite different. Sir Bartholomew left everything to his wife, his first wife, Lydia. Upon her death, it should have passed to her sister. Her sister? Poirot leaned forward. What was her name? Miss Helen Marsh. But she disappeared after Lydia's death. We've been trying to trace her for 30 years. And if she were found? Then technically, she could challenge the current will. Bartholomew changed it after Lydia's death, but there were irregularities. What sort of irregularities? Whitfield looked profoundly uncomfortable. The new will was drawn up very quickly, and there were questions about Lydia's death, whether it was truly suicide, if it could be proved that she was murdered and that Bartholomew was involved. The entire inheritance would be void, Poirot finished. Everything would go to Helen Marsh. If she's still alive, yes. Poirot produced the documents from the tower room. And these contracts with Jonas Holbrook? Whitfield examined them, his face growing graver. These are partnership agreements. Jonas Holbrook provided the initial capital for Bartholomew's business. By rights, Margaret Holbrook should own half the entire Waverly fortune. But she receives only 25% under the current will. Yes, Bartholomew claimed the partnership was dissolved before his success, but these documents suggest otherwise. So we have 2 people with claims to the fortune, I said. Helen Marsh and Margaret Holbrook. 3, Whitfield corrected quietly. There's one more document you should see. He pulled out a yellowed certificate. Lydia Waverly's death certificate. The cause of death is listed as misadventure, not suicide. The coroner refused to rule it suicide because of the locked window and the angle of the fall. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. Then Lydia was murdered, Whitfield finished. Almost certainly, and everyone who was in the house that night knew it. We returned to Thornfield to find an ambulance departing with Mrs. Holbrook, Dr. Pemberton accompanying her. Lady Constance met us at the door, her face drawn. "She's stable," she reported. "But Pemberton says it was close. Another sip or two of that tea." She shuddered. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "we must speak of Lydia's sister. Helen Marsh, what do you know of her?" Lady Constance's face went white. "Helen? But she's dead. She died years ago, in India." "You're certain?" "Bartholomew told me so. He said she died of fever in Bombay." "Yet no death certificate exists," Poirot said. "I think, madame, your husband lied. And I think Helen Marsh is very much alive. Indeed, I believe she is here, in this house, seeking the justice that was denied her sister 30 years ago." "But who?" Lady Constance whispered. "Who could she be?" Poirot's eyes swept the room, taking in Mrs. Crane, who clutched her ever-present handkerchief, Miss Fairfax, who stood quietly by the window, and Thompson, impassive as always by the door. "That, madame, is what we must discover. Before Helen Marsh completes her vengeance and claims what she believes is rightfully hers, the entire Waverly fortune, built on the blood of her sister." Chapter 5. Secrets in the Study. That afternoon, while Mrs. Holbrook fought for her life in the hospital, Poirot made an unusual request. "I wish to examine Sir Bartholomew's study," he announced. "Every drawer, every paper, every book." "But it's being cleared out," Lady Constance protested. "Julia and I went through everything after his death." "Nevertheless, madame, the little grey cells insist. Sometimes what we do not find is as significant as what we do." The study was a somber room dominated by a massive oak desk and walls of leather-bound ledgers. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through tall windows that overlooked the moors. Miss Fairfax produced a key from her ring. "I've maintained everything exactly as Sir Bartholomew left it, except for removing active business papers." "Most thorough of you, mademoiselle." Poirot moved to the desk, running his fingers along its surface. "Tell me, where did Sir Bartholomew keep his private correspondence?" "The bottom drawer, locked, but it was empty when we opened it after his death." "Empty?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "How convenient. And the key?" "He wore it on his watch chain. It was buried with him." Poirot knelt beside the drawer, examining the lock with a magnifying glass. "Hastings, observe these scratches. Fresh ones among the old. Someone has picked this lock recently. Within the past month, I would say." "But why break into an empty drawer?" I asked. "Perhaps to retrieve something left behind, or to place something for later discovery." He pulled the drawer completely out, examining its bottom. "Ah, what have we here?" Pressed flat against the wood was a thin envelope, yellowed with age. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in a woman's delicate handwriting. "My dearest B," Poirot read aloud, "I know what you have done. I know about the contracts, about Jonas, about everything. I cannot live with this knowledge, nor can I live with you. By the time you read this, I will be gone. Do not look for me. Let the world think me dead. It is better that way. L." Lady Constance gasped. "Lydia wrote this, but that means that she did not commit suicide," Poirot finished. "She fled. The woman who fell from the tower was someone else." "Impossible!" Lady Constance shook her head violently. "I saw her body. Bartholomew identified her. A body in a white nightgown, fallen from a great height, the face destroyed by impact," Poirot said gently. "How difficult would it be to mistake one woman for another?" Mrs. Crane, who had been silent throughout our search, suddenly spoke. "There was a maid. I remember hearing about it from the village women. A maid who disappeared the same night Lydia died. They said she ran off with a traveling salesman, but perhaps she never left at all," Poirot murmured. What was her name, madame? Mary something. Mary Jennings. No, that was the cook. Mary Fairfax. We all turned to stare at Miss Fairfax, who had gone very pale. A relation of yours, mademoiselle? Poirot asked quietly. My aunt, she whispered. My father's sister. He always said she died young, in service to a wealthy family. But he never said how. And you never suspected? Not until recently. I found her name in the old household accounts. She was here when Lydia died. And then, nothing. Her wages stopped. Her name disappeared from the records. Thompson cleared his throat. If I may, sir, I remember Mary Fairfax. She was Lady Lydia's personal maid. They were very close, almost like sisters, people said. Sisters, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. Or perhaps actual sisters. Tell me, Miss Fairfax, what was your aunt's maiden name? I don't know. Father never said. Then we must discover it. Thompson, you say Mary and Lydia were close. Did Mary have dark hair, similar height to her mistress? The butler's face had taken on a greyish cast. Yes, sir. People sometimes remarked on the resemblance. Mon Dieu. Poirot began to pace, his hands behind his back. The pattern, she becomes clear. Lydia discovers her husband's crimes, the stolen partnership, perhaps worse. She plans to flee, but someone, Bartholomew, one assumes, discovers her plan. He cannot let her leave. She knows too much. So he killed her maid instead, I exclaimed, pushed her from the tower in Lydia's nightgown, then claimed his wife had committed suicide. Meanwhile, the real Lydia escaped, Lady Constance finished, her voice hollow. Dear God, all these years Bartholomew let me believe. But where did Lydia go? Perhaps, Poirot said, she became Helen Marsh. But Helen Marsh was her sister, I protested. Was she? Or was that identity a convenient fiction, a way for Lydia to disappear completely while staying close enough to watch, to wait for justice? Miss Fairfax moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. If my aunt was murdered, if she died in Lydia's place, then someone here knows the truth. Someone helped cover it up. Or someone has recently discovered it, Poirot suggested. Tell me, Miss Fairfax, why did you really come to work for Sir Bartholomew? She turned to face us, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. I found letters in my father's effects after he died. Letters from his sister, posted from this village just days before her supposed disappearance. She was frightened. She said her mistress was in danger, that Sir Bartholomew was not what he seemed. So you came here seeking answers. I came seeking proof. I've searched for 2 years, but found nothing conclusive. Until now. Dr. Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his face grave. I've returned from the hospital. Margaret is stable, but still unconscious. The police want to investigate the poisoning. As they should, Poirot agreed. But first, Doctor, a question. You were Sir Bartholomew's physician for many years. Tell me, did he ever show signs of guilt? Nightmares, perhaps? Anxiety? The doctor hesitated. He had terrible insomnia the last year of his life, and he often spoke of seeing shadows, hearing footsteps. I prescribed sleeping draughts, but nothing helped. The footsteps of the dead, Mrs. Crane whispered. My husband used to say the guilty never sleep soundly. Your husband knew Sir Bartholomew well? Poirot asked. They were cousins. Charles handled some of Bartholomew's more delicate business matters. What sort of delicate matters? Mrs. Crane twisted her handkerchief. I shouldn't say. Charles made me promise never to speak of it. Madame, we are past the time for such promises. She looked at Lady Constance apologetically. There were payments, regular payments to someone in London. They started about 6 months after Lydia's death and continued for 29 years. Blackmail, I suggested. Or guilt money, Poirot said. Payments to keep someone quiet, or to keep someone away. Lady Constance, You mentioned making payments to London as well. For medical treatments, you said. Lady Constance nodded slowly. The same address, actually. I simply continued the payments Bartholomew had been making. He said it was a charitable obligation. The address, madame? Number 42 Gloucester Place, Marylebone. Poirot's mustaches twitched with excitement. Tomorrow, Hastings, we visit London, but tonight we must be vigilant. Our poisoner has failed once. They will try again. As if in response to his words, a scream echoed from somewhere above us. We rushed upstairs to find Milly, the maid, standing outside Mrs. Crane's room, pointing with a trembling finger. Mrs. Crane sat at her dressing table, perfectly still. Too still. Dr. Pemberton pushed past us, placing his fingers on her neck. She's alive. Drugged, I think. He lifted her eyelids, examining her pupils. Laudanum, a heavy dose. On the mirror before her, written in lipstick, were the words, 2 widows for 2 sins. The testament will be fulfilled. She was the second target all along, Poirot murmured. Not Lady Constance. The question is, will the killer complete their work, or have they already achieved their true purpose? He turned to study each face. Lady Constance, terrified. Miss Fairfax, determined. Thompson, impassive. Dr. Pemberton, concerned. Someone in this house is not who they claim to be, he announced, and before another sun sets, Hercule Poirot will reveal their true identity. The testament of 3 widows holds more than inheritance, mes amis. It holds the key to 30 years of deception. As we carried the unconscious Mrs. Crane to her bed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Her wedding ring was missing, and in its place, wrapped around her finger, was a thin strip of paper. I unfolded it carefully. Written in the same hand as Lydia's letter was a single line. The dead remember everything. Chapter 6. The 4th Widow. The morning mist clung to the London streets as Poirot and I stood before 42 Gloucester Place. It was a modest boarding house, its facade worn but respectable. The landlady, a Mrs. Whitmore, greeted us with suspicion that melted when Poirot mentioned the Waverly name. "Oh, you've come about Mrs. Smith," she said, leading us up narrow stairs. "I wondered when someone would." She passed 3 days ago, peaceful in her sleep. 91 years old she was. "Mrs. Smith received regular payments from Yorkshire?" Poirot inquired. "For nearly 30 years, yes. Never missed a month until she died." She opened a door to reveal a small, tidy room. On the dresser sat a photograph in a silver frame. 3 young women in Victorian dress, their arms linked, smiling at the camera. Poirot lifted it reverently. "Who are these women, madame?" "Mrs. Smith in the center, though that wasn't her real name, of course. She never said, but I knew she was hiding from something, or someone." I studied the photograph. The woman in the center had a kind face and gentle eyes. The woman on her left was undeniably Lydia Waverly, young and radiant. But it was the 3rd woman who made my breath catch. "My God, Poirot. She looks exactly like Mary Fairfax. Oui, because she was Mary Fairfax. Or rather, Mary Marsh, Lydia's younger sister." Mrs. Whitmore nodded. "She finally told me the truth last week, when she knew she was dying. Said she had sisters once, 2 beautiful sisters who married above their station. One married money, the other married for love. Both died for it." "Both?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Then the woman in the center. Helen Marsh, the eldest sister. She came here after something terrible happened to her youngest sister Mary. Lydia, that's the middle sister. She paid for Helen's care all these years." "But Lydia died 30 years ago," I protested. Mrs. Whitmore smiled sadly. "Did she?" "Mrs. Smith received letters every month with her payment. Always signed L, always postmarked from different places. Scotland, Wales, sometimes abroad." Poirot carefully examined the room, finally stopping at a writing desk where a stack of letters lay tied with ribbon. "May we?" She said someone would come for them eventually. Said they were proof of a great injustice. The letters were indeed from Lydia, written over 3 decades. The first, dated just weeks after her supposed suicide, was heartbreaking. "Dearest Helen, Mary is dead. Bartholomew killed her, thinking she was me. I cannot return. He would kill me too. Take this money and hide yourself well. One day when he is gone, I will return for justice. Until then, we must be ghosts. Your loving sister, L." Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. 3 sisters, 3 victims of Sir Bartholomew's greed, but where has Lydia been all these years? The final letter, dated just 1 month ago, provided the answer. "Dearest Helen, the time has come. Bartholomew is dead, but his widows live on, enjoying wealth built on our sister's blood. I have returned to Thornfield under another name. Justice will be served. The testament will be fulfilled. 3 widows must pay for their complicity in 3 sins. If something happens to me, know that I loved you always. L." "She's at Thornfield," I gasped. "Right now. She's been there all along." "Précisément, and we must return immediately. For tonight, I fear, she plans to complete her vengeance." We raced back to Yorkshire, arriving at Thornfield as dusk was falling. The house seemed quieter than usual, almost expectant. Thompson met us at the door, his face grave. "Mrs. Crane has awakened, sir, but she remembers nothing. Lady Constance has locked herself in her room. Terrified. And Miss Fairfax?" "Yes?" "She's disappeared. Her room is empty, her belongings gone." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "How convenient. And Dr. Pemberton?" "In the library, sir, with Inspector Raglan from the county police." We found the inspector, a tall, thin man with a skeptical expression, interviewing Dr. Pemberton. "Ah, Poirot," the inspector said dismissively. "I heard you were meddling in this affair. Simple case of attempted murder for inheritance, I'd say. That Fairfax woman, clearly after the money." "Yet she stands to inherit nothing," Poirot pointed out. "Unless she's not who she claims to be," the inspector countered. "I've done my research. There's no record of a Julia Fairfax before 2 years ago." "Because that's not her real name," Dr. Pemberton said quietly. We all turned to stare at him. The doctor removed his spectacles, cleaning them slowly. "I've known who she really was from the day she arrived. She's Mary Fairfax's daughter." "Her daughter," I exclaimed. "Mary was with child when she died. Or when we thought she died. If she survived, if she had that child, Julia would be about the right age." "But you said nothing?" Poirot's voice was stern. "What could I say? I had no proof. And if she was seeking justice for her mother's death, didn't she deserve to find it? Even if that justice involved murder?" Inspector Raglan demanded. "But she hasn't murdered anyone," Lady Constance said from the doorway. She entered slowly, a leather journal in her hands. "This was hidden in my husband's safe. I finally found the courage to break it open." She handed the journal to Poirot. "It's Bartholomew's confession. Everything is here. How he stole Jonas Holbrook's money, how he discovered Lydia was planning to expose him, how he—" Her voice broke. "How he pushed Mary Fairfax from the tower, believing she was Lydia." "And you 3 widows?" Poirot asked gently. "What was your involvement?" Lady Constance sank into a chair. "I knew nothing until after Bartholomew died. But Margaret, she knew her husband had been cheated. She kept silent for a share of the fortune. And Eleanor?" Mrs. Crane appeared in the doorway, supported by Thompson. Her face was pale but determined. "Charles helped Bartholomew cover it up. He disposed of evidence, paid bribes, created false records showing Mary Fairfax had left the country. We all knew, we all kept silent, we all profited from murder." "So Lydia was right," I said. 3 widows, 3 sins." "Greed, complicity?" And silence. But where is she? Poirot mused. Where is Lydia now? A voice from the shadows answered, She's here. We turned as one. Standing in the doorway, no longer the nervous, fluttering creature we had known, stood Mrs. Eleanor Crane. But her entire bearing had changed. She stood straight, her eyes clear and fierce, the handkerchief nowhere in sight. "You're not Eleanor Crane," Poirot said softly. "No. Eleanor died 6 months ago in France. I took her identity, came here as the grieving widow. I've waited 30 years for this moment." "Lydia," Lady Constance whispered. "Yes." The woman we had known as Mrs. Crane smiled bitterly. "Surprised? You shouldn't be. You all looked right through me, just as you looked through my sister Mary when she was alive. The overlooked, the ignored, the invisible." "You poisoned Margaret," Inspector Raglan said, reaching for his handcuffs. "I gave her a dose of her own medicine. She'll survive, unfortunately. Just as I survived 30 years of exile while she enjoyed my fortune. And the laudanum. Self-administered. I needed you to think I was a victim too." She turned to Poirot. "I knew you would discover the truth eventually. Your little grey cells are quite famous. But I needed time to complete one last task." "Which was?" She smiled. "Destroying Bartholomew's real will, the one he wrote the night he died. You see, I was there. I came back that night 2 years ago, disguised as a servant. I gave him the digitalis that stopped his heart. Justice for Mary. But first, I watched him write a new will, one that would have given everything to charity, leaving all 3 widows destitute." "Where is this will?" the inspector demanded. "Ashes in the fireplace. Without it, the current will stand. And as I am legally Eleanor Crane, I inherit my share, which I'll use to build a proper memorial for my sister Mary, the true victim in all this." "You cannot escape justice," the inspector said. "What justice?" Lydia laughed bitterly. "Arrest me for being presumed dead, for taking the identity of a woman who died naturally. The poisoning was non-fatal, the drugging self-inflicted. As for Bartholomew, prove I was even in the country when he died." Poirot stepped forward. "There is another will, madame." Lydia's confidence faltered. "What?" "The will Sir Bartholomew wrote 30 years ago, leaving everything to Helen Marsh if Lydia predeceased her. Lydia Waverly is legally dead. Helen Marsh died 3 days ago in London, which means the estate goes to Helen's next of kin," the inspector finished. "Her niece, Miss Julia Fairfax, or should I say Miss Mary Fairfax, daughter of the murdered Mary Marsh." The door opened one final time. Julia Fairfax entered, no longer the efficient secretary, but a young woman bearing the unmistakable features of the Marsh sisters. "Aunt Lydia," she said softly, "it's over. Mother's death has been avenged. Let the law handle the rest." Lydia, Eleanor, looked at her niece for a long moment. Then she began to laugh, a sound both bitter and relieved. "The 4th widow," she said. "I became a widow the night Bartholomew killed Mary. A widow to my own life, my own name, my own soul. But you're right, child. It's over." She held out her wrists to the inspector. "Arrest me if you must. But know this, I regret nothing except that Mary died in my place." Chapter 7. Justice for the Testament. The drawing room at Thornfield Manor had witnessed many gatherings over its long history, but none quite like this. Inspector Raglan had arranged the seating with military precision. The 3 widows, for we still thought of them as such, on one sofa, Julia Fairfax in an armchair, Dr. Pemberton and Thompson standing by the fireplace. I took my usual place beside Poirot, who stood before the mantelpiece like a conductor preparing to lead his final symphony. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying that familiar authority, "we are gathered to untangle a web of deception that spans 30 years. 3 murders, 3 widows, 3 sins, but also 3 sisters whose tragic fate began with one man's greed. He turned to the portrait of Sir Bartholomew that dominated the wall. This man built an empire on theft and maintained it through murder. Yet for 30 years, his crime remained hidden. Why? Because those who knew the truth profited from silence. Lady Constance shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Holbrook, brought from the hospital that morning, sat rigid with fury, and Lydia, still in the guise of Eleanor Crane, watched with eyes that held 3 decades of pain. "Let us begin," Poirot said, "with the first crime. 30 years ago, Sir Bartholomew Waverly discovered his wife Lydia planned to expose his theft of Jonas Holbrook's fortune. She had learned the truth about the partnership her husband had hidden, the money he had stolen to build his empire. She wrote him a letter, the letter we found, announcing her intention to disappear. He produced the yellowed paper, but Bartholomew could not let her leave. She knew too much. So he formulated a plan most cruel. He would kill her and claim suicide, thus protecting both his fortune and his reputation. But he failed, Julia said quietly. Oui, mademoiselle. He failed because the Marsh sisters, Lydia, Helen, and Mary, were cleverer than he knew. Lydia confided in her youngest sister Mary, who was also her maid. Together they planned Lydia's escape. Mary would help her mistress flee, then follow herself once suspicion had died. Thompson cleared his throat. I remember that night. Lady Lydia retired early, complaining of a headache. But it was Mary who went to the tower room in Lydia's nightgown, Poirot continued. The sisters had switched places many times before. Their resemblance was remarkable. Mary was to wait there while Lydia escaped through the servants' entrance, but Bartholomew, suspicious, followed who he thought was his wife. Lydia's hands clenched. He didn't even hesitate. He pushed her from the window while she was looking at the stars. Mary loved the stars. In the darkness, with the body fallen from such a height, identification was simple. The nightgown, the room, the assumption. Who would question that the body was Lydia's? Bartholomew himself identified her. The servants were too shocked to look closely, and by morning the truth was buried with Mary Marsh. But surely someone suspected, Inspector Raglan interjected. 3 people knew the truth immediately, Poirot said. Helen Marsh, the eldest sister, who had helped plan the escape. Charles Crane, who helped dispose of evidence, and Jonas Holbrook, who recognized an opportunity for profitable silence. Mrs. Holbrook's face darkened. My husband was a weak man. Bartholomew offered him a percentage to stay quiet, and he took it. As did you all eventually, Poirot said sternly. Lady Constance, you married Bartholomew knowing there were questions about his first wife's death. You chose not to ask them. I was young, Lady Constance protested. I was in love. With his money, Lydia said bitterly. The second crime, Poirot continued, occurred 2 years ago. Lydia had waited, planned, prepared. When she learned Eleanor Crane had died in France, the real Eleanor Crane, she took her identity and returned to Thornfield. Bartholomew never recognized her. How could he? He had barely looked at the nervous, fluttering widow of his cousin. The night he died, Lydia said, I put digitalis in his brandy, the same poison he had accused me of planning to use on him 30 years ago, another of his lies to justify my suicide. I watched him drink it. I watched him realize what was happening, and I told him who I was. His face, she continued with grim satisfaction, was worth 30 years of exile. He tried to speak, to call for help, but the poison was too quick. He managed to write a new will, thinking it would punish everyone, but I burned it the moment he died. Murder, Inspector Raglan said firmly. Clear confession. Prove it, Lydia challenged. Prove Eleanor Crane wasn't in France that night. Prove Lydia Waverly didn't die 30 years ago. Every record shows otherwise. Which brings us to the third murder, Poirot said. Or rather, the attempted murder that revealed everything. You tried to kill Lady Constance with poisoned tea. She deserved it. Living in my house, spending my money, sleeping in the bed where my sister was conceived. But Margaret Holbrook drank it instead. And that mistake, madame, revealed your hand too clearly. It made us look closer, dig deeper, uncover the truth. The little grey cells, Poirot touched his head. They saw the pattern. 3 widows in one house, unusual. 3 attempts on one widow's life. Suspicious. But 3 sisters, 3 sins, 3 decades of deception. That was the key. He moved to stand before Julia Fairfax. And you, mademoiselle, you came here seeking truth about your mother's death. Julia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Mother survived the fall. Barely. A gardener found her, took her to his cottage. She lived long enough to give birth to me, then died of her injuries. The gardener and his wife raised me as their own, but they told me the truth when I was 18. So you came to Thornfield as a secretary, searching for evidence. I found Father's journal last month, she said, looking at Lydia. That's when I realized who you really were, Aunt Lydia. I saw you putting flowers in the tower room. Only family would tend such a shrine. Thompson stepped forward. If I may, sir, there's something else. The butler's composed facade cracked slightly. I helped Lady Lydia escape that night 30 years ago. I was young, in love with Mary Marsh. She asked me to ensure her mistress got away safely while she created the diversion. I've lived with the guilt ever since. Which is why you've been helping Lydia these past months, Poirot observed. The raven feathers, the messages, the access to the house. You facilitated it all. Thompson nodded. When I recognized her, despite her disguise, I knew why she had come. Justice was long overdue. Dr. Pemberton spoke up. I too bear responsibility. I suspected Bartholomew had poisoned himself. The symptoms were too convenient, too precise. But I signed the death certificate as natural causes. I told myself it was justice for Lydia. We all knew, Mrs. Holbrook said suddenly. We all knew Bartholomew was a murderer, and we all kept silent for money. She looked at the inspector. Arrest us all, or arrest none of us. We're all guilty. Inspector Raglan looked overwhelmed. This is unprecedented. The jurisdictional complexities alone. May I suggest, Poirot said carefully, a solution that serves both law and justice? Everyone turned to him expectantly. The murder of Mary Marsh 30 years ago, unprovable now. The witnesses are dead, the evidence destroyed. The murder of Sir Bartholomew, equally unprovable. Eleanor Crane was documented in France. Lydia Waverly is legally dead. The attempted poisoning of Margaret Holbrook, unfortunate accident with contaminated tea, impossible to prove intent. You're saying we do nothing? The inspector protested. I'm saying, mon ami, that sometimes the law and justice are not the same. Consider, Julia Fairfax is the rightful heir to the Waverly fortune as Helen Marsh's only living relative. The 3 widows have already paid. Lady Constance loses her home and position, Mrs. Holbrook nearly died, and loses her claim, and Lydia has suffered 30 years of exile. He turned to address the room, but there must be conditions. Lady Constance, you will vacate Thornfield immediately and live on the modest pension Miss Fairfax chooses to provide. Mrs. Holbrook, you will do the same. Your silence was bought with blood money. Now you must live with the consequences. Both women nodded, defeated. Lydia, Poirot continued gently, you must choose. Remain as Eleanor Crane and face potential investigation, or disappear again, this time for good. I'm tired of running, Lydia said. I'm tired of being someone else. She looked at Julia. I have no right to ask, but... You're my aunt, Julia said simply. My mother's sister. You're welcome to stay at Thornfield as long as you wish. As yourself if you choose, or as Eleanor if you prefer. The world thinks Lydia dead. Perhaps she should remain so. Thompson stepped forward. I'll be leaving service, sir. My conscience can no longer bear this house. Nor mine, added Dr. Pemberton. I'll be closing my practice. retiring to the coast. Inspector Raglan shook his head. This is highly irregular, but given the circumstances, the lack of provable evidence, the time elapsed, I suppose I have no choice but to close the case as a series of unfortunate accidents. The testament of 3 widows, Poirot mused, was not about inheritance after all. It was about truth, justice, and the price of complicity. Sir Bartholomew wrote in his final will about provisions for justice. Ironically, justice has provided for itself. As the gathering dispersed, each to face their own future, I found myself alone with Poirot by the fireplace. The portrait of Sir Bartholomew seemed to watch us with those penetrating eyes. Did we do the right thing, Poirot, letting murder go unpunished? He was quiet for a moment, stroking his moustaches thoughtfully. What is murder, mon ami? Is it only the physical act of killing, or is it also the murder of truth, of justice, of a young woman's future? Mary Marsh died 30 years ago, but in a way, so did Lydia, so did Helen, hiding in London. Even Julia, raised by strangers, robbed of her true identity. Sir Bartholomew killed them all in different ways. His death was not justice, it was merely the stopping of more injustice. Can Hercule Poirot condemn a woman for avenging her sister? Can he punish the desperate actions of the long oppressed? He moved to the window, gazing out at the moors where fog was, beginning to gather. The little grey cells, they understand the law, but the heart, Hastings, the heart understands justice. Sometimes we must choose which to serve. And Thompson, he was an accomplice. To love, Hastings. He was an accomplice to love. He tried to save the woman he cared for, and has lived with that failure for 30 years. Is that not punishment enough? That evening, as we prepared to leave Thornfield, Julia Fairfax approached us. She had already begun to transform the house, opening windows that had been closed for decades, bringing light into shadowed corners. Monsieur Poirot, she said, I wanted to thank you, not just for uncovering the truth, but for understanding that sometimes truth and law are not the same as justice and healing. The house, Poirot observed. It already seems lighter. I'm going to turn it into a sanctuary, she said. A place for women fleeing dangerous situations, women like my mother and aunt who need somewhere safe to run to. It seems appropriate. Your mother would be proud, Lydia said, appearing in the doorway. She had shed the Eleanor Crane persona entirely, standing straight and strong. Mary always wanted to help others. As our car pulled away from Thornfield Manor, I took one last look at the ancient stones, the tower where tragedy had begun, the windows now glowing with warm light instead of secrets. No more ghosts, I said. No, mon ami, Poirot agreed. Only the living, finally free to live. The moors stretched endlessly before us, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the cry of a curlew, no longer mournful, but free. The testament of 3 widows had been fulfilled, not in the way anyone expected, but in the way justice demanded. The heart, Poirot said softly, almost to himself. It is always the heart that shows us the way. The law sees only the crime, but the heart sees the human being behind it, the pain that drives us to desperate acts, the love that survives even death. As we drove through the Yorkshire dusk toward London, I reflected on all I had witnessed. 3 sisters torn apart by one man's greed. 3 widows bound by complicity and guilt. 3 murders that spanned 3 decades. And in the end, one young woman inheriting not just a fortune, but the responsibility to heal what had been broken. Poirot, I said finally, do you think they'll find peace? He was quiet for a long moment. Peace, Hastings, is not found. It is built slowly, day by day, truth by truth. They have the truth now. The rest, he gestured expressively, the rest is up to them. The last thing I saw as we crested the hill was a single light in the tower window, not a signal of distress this time, but perhaps a memorial, a light for Mary Marsh, who died in her sister's place. A light for all the invisible victims whose stories never get told. Until now.